Welcome to Energy and Infrastructure from Ulteig, a podcast focused on technology, innovation, policy, and funding. Our podcast discusses the hot issues facing our industry today, interviewing experts, CEOs, elected officials, and the disruptors making an impact in our industry. I'm your host, Aaron Lauinger, Market Director at Ulteig. The construction industry has undergone considerable change in recent years. Not only is the field becoming more collaborative and organized, but so too are the contract models. I think we are all familiar with the design bid build model or the design build model, but less are more familiar with some of the other alternative delivery methodologies. Today, we're going to talk about one of those delivery models that has been gaining a lot of popularity, and that is Construction Manager General Contractor, or as the abbreviation is known, Cmgc. Cmgc is a unique contract method that allows an owner to hire an engineer and a contractor separately, there's the key part of that, early in the design phase. This contract method is designed to accelerate project delivery and reduce costs. We're going to spend this podcast talking about what those results can be and end it with this idea about how innovation really comes out of this method. Joining me today is an expert panel that we have in our virtual studio. First, I have Matt Hogan, who is the Vice President with Kraemer North America, having worked on complex highway and bridge projects across the country. He has spent the last 13 years in the Mountain West, where he has led 8 separate Cmgc contracts to successful completion in both Colorado and Utah, including the I-70 Twin Tunnels program. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Also joining us today is Michelle Pinkerton from Jacobs. Michelle has worked in the profession for over 35 years on design bid build, design build, and Cmgc in Colorado and throughout the U.S. She is the project manager of the more than $350 million I-25 South Gap Cmgc project that is currently under construction. Welcome to the show, Michelle.
Thanks. Glad to be here and for the opportunity.
And finally, Bob Smith, my colleague, who currently manages and oversees our construction management group at Ulteig in our transportation sector. He is a former CDOT resident engineer with almost 20 years at CDOT, and for this panel, really bring in the perspective and the lens of that owner. Bob has managed large CDOT construction projects, including multiple Cmgc projects, and has 30 years of construction management experience. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks, Aaron.
We're going to start with you, Bob. Obviously, we invited you into the show because of that vast construction experience, but also from the perspective that you have that owner's lens. Spending almost 20 years at CDOT and managing Cmgc projects, you kind of bring that unique, specific part of this whole equation. And we're going to talk about some of those values and what qualifies a project, how well it is. So maybe, Bob, you can start out from that owner's perspective. When we talk Cmgc, what are the qualifiers for a project that choose Cmgc as the methodology for delivery?
Sure, Aaron. So what we look for as an owner when we select the delivery method is Cmgc projects get selected usually because they're complex projects that are served well by having that owner, designer, and contractor in the room together, figuring out, complex issues that really need that expertise rather than, the low bid process where maybe the complexities are not there. Some other things that really lend itself to Cmgc is when you have projects that have, for example, right-of-way constraints where multiple packages lend itself to getting those projects out the door quicker.
And to Michelle and Matt, I mean, there's kind of this stigma out there about this contractor versus engineer, right? And we're bringing both of them into the mix right away or early in the design phase. From your perspectives, when you look at that contractor side, let's start with the contractor side, Matt. I mean, what are the advantages or the value that utilizing this methodology for delivery?
The biggest value that we see is having a seat at the table to sit with the designers, with the owner's goals in mind, and really work through project solutions that meet those owners' goals in the most economical way we can. We look forward to reviewing the plans, finding the best way to build solutions and innovations that we've seen in other states or other places to the benefit of every owner that we work for. So it's that bringing all of that collaboration and working together really does, I think, end up with a much cleaner set of plans that gets built for the budget that's set, and there's no changes as the project goes along. So we really see that as a huge value, not only for us from a planning perspective, but then delivering for the owner exactly what they asked for in the time they asked for it.
And Michelle, would you agree with that value? How is it coming to the table with the contractor kind of productively inserting themselves into your design phase?
I feel it is extremely critical that they are in the room working with our designers at the onset of the project. And the reason for that is because so often, especially on complex projects, it's really how are we going to build it? And that's going to really set the stage as to how we're going to design it in terms of, the most efficient design as possible. Plus, we get so much value engineering in all of our design development through the meetings that we have, as we develop the design, and having the contractor in the same room gives us that great construction perspective from our designers to think things through as they put the best design ever. One thing that I want to just say that another advantage too of CMGC is that so often anymore, it's hard to find funding to build the whole project, right? And CMGC, that allows you to construct different packages to meet the available funding at that time. And so, like, for example, the I-25 South Gap, they didn't have all the money at one time. So we, along with the contractor and the owner, developed packages that actually aligned with the available money that was coming in. And therefore, we were able to start construction a lot earlier than if we waited to have all of the funding available.
Yeah, funding's critical to every project. We know that, it doesn't matter what sector you're in, but we rely heavily on funding sources, particularly in the public sector. Matt, to you, this idea around what I'll call a misconception on the idea of an uneven playing field that might not lead to the best overall pricing, right? We have limited funding, the traditional delivery methodologies that say, this is the process to get us the best price to optimize our funds. Talk me through that misconception around that uneven playing field.
Well, I think the way I'd like to address it is really to, talk about the transparency that exists in CMGC, right? I think those that may not have had the opportunity to work with an owner and a designer and the independent cost estimator, who is that other, the other portion at the table with us, doesn't understand the transparency and the conversations that goes on. We get to have conversations about costs from day one as it relates to risk and as it relates to schedule and as it relates to the project goals, where we're able to work transparently with the independent cost estimator, with the owner's representatives, to tell them what the cost of the project is. It is always transparent. And what we also do throughout it is get market pricing, right? We, on most every CMGC, will price out the majority of the work. We'll price it self-perform as well as subcontracting pricing to make sure that the full benefit and market is being shown to the owner and they're getting the best possible value. It really does continue to go down to managing risk. And that's one of the giant aspects of CMGC, is that we're pricing risk appropriately at the bid table. We're putting it in the right bucket of who can handle it the right way. And that in itself helps drive the correct cost of the projects. The final construction cost is the same as it was on bid day, which unfortunately isn't always the case in bid build world.
Bob, from an owner's perspective, I mean, there's limited funds from funding agencies that are supporting the capital projects that are being developed and built. Clearly, those agencies, those owners, are picking the delivery methodology that's going to result in the best overall product, not only just from the sense of costs, but overall what you're trying to achieve from your project objectives and goals. So from that owner's perspective, how does the owner weigh into this idea that there's a misconception that it's uneven playing field in regards to this?
That is a difficult question to answer, Aaron, just because you don't get to build the project twice. So it's hard to say what a project is going to cost, design, bid, build. You may end up with a slightly cheaper cost at the beginning. And as Matt said, you've got risk set up in a CMGC project where if the owner's carrying it or if the contractor's carrying it. But in the end, you end up with very few claims on CMGC projects. And the owner cost of of a claim or a project, heaven forbid, that you would have to fire a contractor, and it happens, the owner's cost is tremendous out there. We've seen 20 to 30% cost escalation on a project that goes south from a design bid build. And not every design bid build is going to go that way, but CMGC projects are rarely ever have that kind of difficulty.
Michelle, to you, each of you, Matt, Bob, Michelle, have talked about kind of the results, right? We've heard it throughout what we've said in this session. But, from that engineer's perspective, kind of the result of your deliverable that's going to go to build, I mean, where do you see the value or the results that are coming out of CMGC?
For me, for the designer, the results are in the development of the design, because we are value engineering with the contractor every time we meet. And as a result of that, we are selecting a more efficient design as a result of that value engineering. So for example, let's just say we have these weekly discipline task force meetings. And in the structural meeting, we'll go through a design that the designer has gone through, and the contractors in the room, they go, what happens if you do this? Because then we'll be able to save money by, doing this construction. And so the designer would say, okay, let's take a look at it and see. And it just kind of, and if they can't make it happen, at least they talk about it. And at the end of the day, the resulting decision is a combination of all these discussions on what ifs, can we do this? If not, why can't we do that? If we can't do that, can we do this? And you just have a more efficient design for the contractor with lower cost. And, we were able to save, quite a bit of money with all of these value engineering discussions that we had. We saved over $15 million just on the I-25 South Gap, construction, just from these value engineering ideas that was a collaboration between the designer, the owner, and the contractor. So
$50 million. That's a whole lot of other projects in the state of Colorado.
It was a lot. But you know what? We had a great team. The key for that is having the right designer, the right contractor, and the owner being very proactive, and opening everybody, making sure their mind is open and not caving into the way we used to do things, and not being adverse to risk. That's going to be really important.
Having got the chance to work on South Gap a little bit, but then having, hearing the stories from my colleagues that have worked with you, right? Being able to sit at the table and talk about the right median wall solution that fit that project, right? That may not appear to be the most cost effective on some projects, but on the I-25 South Gap, for other reasons, for phasing reasons, for excavation and earthwork handling, the wall selection on South Gap really, I think that in itself, I've heard, was a $10 million savings when we went through and picked the right wall that was going to be built for 3 miles along that corridor. And having the right designers, as you talked about, and the right people in the room being able to have those tough conversations to say, we've gone down this road, but the right answer is to do a little bit more work here to save an awful lot of work in physical construction, is the true success of CMGC, when we get to put our egos aside and do what's right for the project and right for the owner. And that is the fun part about CMGC in my mind, is when you get to walk away and say, gosh, we really did the right thing by the owner, whether it's the state of Colorado or a local municipality. That's the things to celebrate. And a lot of it gets done during pre-construction.
Absolutely. And Matt, I'm glad you brought that example. Another great example is on the County Line Bridge. We lengthened the bridge, we made it longer. And the reason we made it longer is to eliminate MSC walls, on I-25, because that would be so costly with the foundation of the walls, and more importantly, more costly from constructability. So
the key word I heard throughout that was collaboration. And I think you're a fool if you stand on the side to say that you can't accomplish more if you don't collaborate. So walk me through that idea as an engineer myself, right, versus a contractor. I think there's this idea of owner versus contractor versus engineer, and we team up. And you guys have kind of debunked that a bit, right? We put egos aside, we do these things, common objectives and goals, and we accomplish a lot more. But what are some of those, as part of that, in your experiences, Bob, Matt, Michelle, looking at lessons learned, or what are those best practices that ensure the CMGC model is going to deliver the results you've been talking about?
Michelle, and I think Bob talked about it already, but it's that continuous communication that happens in the many different ways, whether it's communication about risk, it's communication about schedule, it's communication about cost. It's being able to have that regular dialogue that isn't available in a bid build world, right? In a bid build world, we get 2 weeks to ask questions. And then we get a set of plans to bid and build, for better or for worse. And in CMGC, we get, in some cases, a year to ask questions and get to the right solution by having this open and honest communication throughout. It doesn't seem like much of a tool, but communication is the biggest one in my mind.
Yeah, and I'll jump in, Matt. The other thing is, you got to check that ego at the door when you come into these meetings. So you, as an owner, you try to hire the smartest people you can, the people that have the most experience up front. And that's where we found the best project end up is hiring the best that we can, that have had some experience doing the specific project that we're going to work on, and then listening to them and letting them assist the designers and assist the owner in delivering that project. That's where I see the benefits. And really, when you come into the room and everybody's known each other for several months, you really can have some good synergy going.
Michelle, what do you think are some of the best practices to enable CMGC between a contractor, owner, and engineer?
One of the best practices is to have a good communication plan, because there's so many different things going on at one time that everybody knows what's going on. If there's any changes, everybody's always making sure that those changes get communicated to everybody, because you never know from the onset of the change how many folks and disciplines it's going to impact. So that's very key. The other best practice would be, again, keep an open mind. I mean, everybody's got to keep an open mind in terms of decision making, in terms of ideas, in terms of not being afraid to suggest ideas that may not seem like it would be a good idea, but at the end of the day, it was a good idea, perhaps maybe revised, and be able to make sure that the design reviews are turned around very quickly, and also decisions that have to be made. And most likely you will not have all the information you need to make those decisions. Those decisions get made moving forward, and you manage it based on risk, like what Matt was saying earlier.
Decision making and documenting decisions is a critical part. And Michelle, thanks for bringing that up, right? There's a lot that happens in the task force meeting that then goes to a future progress meeting with a larger group. And developing tools to document what has happened as part of the CMGC is even a bigger step than when you're doing it in a normal design. From what I've seen, being able to look into the designer's window here over the last several years as part of this process. So developing those tools and the practices of really saying, nope, this is the decision, this is why we made the decision, so that 3 months later, when someone comes back or someone new comes to the team and says, no, why didn't you do this? We're able to show them exactly why we made that decision, whether it be a stakeholder, a new team member, or even a subcontractor that you've asked to price it. You're able to give them that documentation of what led to these decisions that really the entire project team thought was best for the project.
Yeah, those are all really great points. Have you guys ever we're talking about all the benefits, but obviously, you get these lessons learned because things don't always go as great. What are some of those? Have you been in those circumstances before where CMGC methodology, I don't want to say didn't deliver, but, from these lessons learned, is there an opportunity? Have you seen exit strategies where if it isn't working, are those parameters set up in this kind of contracting methodology to protect overall the owner and the project objectives, goals?
Well, as an owner, you absolutely have the ability to have that off ramp as you create your GMP. If a contractor, for example, is way out of line on his pricing, you do not have to award those contracts. So that's one thing you can do. But really, Aaron, the first thing you need to do is early on in that selection process is selecting competent contractors and competent designers, and you lessen the chance of that happening.
Yeah, I think we've seen quite the evolution, from an engineering perspective, contractors, especially over the last 2 decades. The sophistication and the capability, the type of people, the smart people that they're bringing to the projects is incredible. It's a different horizon than 20 years ago, which is absolutely incredible. And no, Matt is not paying me. That is a compliment to the contracting world, and we have organizations like AGC that are working with ACEC to help develop this. I mean, contractors now have in-house engineers, right? It's just not on the designer or the owner side. They have a large stake in this also.
I appreciate that, Aaron. Most of us have engineering degrees as background and just chose to go play in the dirt rather than sit at a computer. Although, of course, now I've turned into a computer jockey myself, it seems. But we appreciate that. And I do think whether it's years of experience by those of us that have come up through the field or through an engineering background, we're able to speak the right language with the designers and understand the concepts that they're trying to solve along with the owner and really get to those great solutions that we have on the project. But be realistic about it. We had a project not too long ago in a different state in Utah where we got through about 70% design and realized we had the absolute wrong structure type. It was going to create problems. It was going to be a budget issue. And the project team there, because we had the right people in the room with the right expertise, as you talked about, we're able to sit down and say, no, there's a better solution that's going to give us 98% of what we want without the risk and without the cost of where we were headed. And while it wasn't an out, it was an out in design. Kept the same designers, everybody was still there, but we were able to make the right decision within the CMG process. And it cost a couple of months in design, but at the end of the day, it gave the owner exactly what they wanted at the budget they wanted. And it's those types of innovations and being willing to have those tough conversations that don't lead to having to cancel a contract. It actually is what leads to the success of Cmgc and the projects in themselves.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up innovation. I mentioned it earlier, and it's important to note that Federal Highway adopted Cmgc for the sole purpose of the ability to innovate. That is why Cmgc was created, to give the owners an avenue and the designers an avenue to bring value engineering and innovation into contracting methodology that isn't there by traditional means through design, bid, build. What are some of those examples? Matt, you just mentioned a good one. Michelle, you had one earlier about the lengthening the bridge, which seems unorthodox to saving costs, but we also reduced all the walls. What are some of those other examples of innovation that you guys have brought to projects that ultimately, right, what are the objectives? Deliver the project at an accelerated schedule and lower the cost.
Well, one thing that I can think of off the top of my head, which was extremely critical because it was for the first package, which was the most critical package because that was the starting point for the construction schedule for the overall corridor on the GAP project. And there were some settlement issues that our geotechnical folks were telling us that a section was going to settle quite a bit. And it was going to compromise this overall construction schedule as well as increase the cost tremendously because we'd either have to provide really deep foundations, caisson foundations, which would really kill the budget, or two, we would have to have the soil settle for about 6 months, which would kill the schedule. The innovative thing that our team did was, it's still in pre-construction, we actually put a test section out there in the median and monitor the settlement while we continued to design. As a result of that, prior to when we submitted our final design and looking at the test results, it didn't look like it was settling as much as we thought it would. So we just continued to monitor it as the median walls were built. And at the end of the day, it didn't settle like they thought it would. And we saved $3 million. So that was one of the big innovation ideas that our team came up with, among many, but I'd like to give it to others to add theirs, and I could add more.
It seems like every project has a unique innovation or a unique solution that we get to collaborate on. Some of them are bigger than others, right? It could just be recognizing that you can order material sooner the innovation of long lead time procurement so that you can meet a schedule. I think probably half of the projects I've been involved with Cmgc has put a procurement in early so that you have the right materials at the right time to meet the schedule requirements that you're going to work on. So they can be simple innovations that otherwise, if you had to do it in a different delivery method, you'd have to wait 6 months before you start construction, or you would add 6 months of impacts to the users because of how you would procure that project. Foundation risk is always a big deal on structure projects. We got to work with Ulteig here recently, or are still working on delivering one with Ulteig. And as part of that Cmgc and pre-construction, we recognize the risk and understanding bond strength of the soil relative to our foundation selection. So we were able to, with a very small cost during pre-construction, go up and actually put some test piles in the ground and pull on them to verify that strength, which really minimized risk in design, that allowed us to optimize the design and save initial construction costs that led to cap on the first round and coming in below what was CDOT's budget on the project. So we're proud of even small innovations like that help make projects a reality.
They all add up.
Yeah, I think we should get a tally going. We've heard 50 million, 3 million. It's a heck of a pot of money that's being saved.
Well, and I know Matt knows about this one as well, but the Twin Tunnels project was built on one of the most accelerated schedules, certainly for a tunnel that Colorado's ever done. Cmgc was a big contributor to that, being able to order specific equipment that Kraemer knew they needed, order tunnel forms that somehow we got CDOT to be willing to pay for ahead of time, well before we were actually under construction contracts. That I'll let Matt talk about how much time that actually saved, but it was certainly significant.
Yeah, I mean, things like tunnel forms or specialty form work for any bridge, right? It can be 9 months to a year to procure those to get the right thing at the right time. So we were able to, 9 months in advance, order the forms so that they were there at the right time when we needed to start placing concrete. And without those, we wouldn't have had the tunnels reopened at the time we did, or we would have had to wait another year before we started excavating until we could know when they were going to be there. So that, along with the drill jumbos and the specialty equipment that was needed on twin tunnels, were certainly some of that. And the other nice part about being involved early is innovation isn't necessarily just hard construction. Twin tunnels is another good example where access and limits of disturbance were a big deal. And by being involved early in that process during the environmental assessment, we were able to identify impacts that hadn't been identified by the designers and the EA team yet. And by identifying them early, we were able to do a concurrent reevaluation that was able to meet the continued FONSI date and maintain that environmental assessment schedule for some of the impacts that hadn't been considered as part of construction. Not to mention develop the right mitigation that could actually be implemented with the EA that I think is, even in the environmental phase, there's innovations that come out that help these projects at the end of the day.
Matt, you know what? I'm so glad you brought that up, because when we were told that we needed to get construction started on the first package, we had to look for ways to innovate processes, our standard CDOT processes, to be able to pull the 30% plans together first, work in alignment with environmental assessment, the NEPA, and then get a 90%, 100%, and then final plans in less than a year. The innovative processes that we did for 30% was, instead of having our normal, what we call cut sheets, we decided to run the 30% almost like a public meeting, if you would, a workshop. And we provided roll plots. We invited all of the reviewer stakeholders to come into our office, review the plans. We had all our design discipline leads available to answer questions right away, and documentation of all of the reviews. We had roll plots, and we provided them as a PDF format for those who could not come in person. I think this is the very first time that I am aware that we actually had a formal 30% FIR plan set that was a roll plot instead of cut sheets.
I remember coming in your office and commenting on those.
It's kind of thinking outside the box and asking the questions, can we do this instead of this? And not being afraid to ask the question, because, there was just no way that we would be able to pull something together that quickly. And quite frankly, most everybody will probably just tape them together anyway, because they want to see the big picture.
Yeah, I can't see me now, but it's my office every time we do a job is 11 by 17s taped together. But one of the things that made me think of, Michelle, is co-location. And being able, and we did it on GAP with you, and we've did it on Twin Tunnels with Atkins, and I've done it on several projects where we sit at the table and we're there, right? You talk about having the designers being there to answer questions at a design review. It's equally important to have the contractor there next to the designer as they're developing the design, so they can ask the question of, hey, which one of these is most economical? Which one is going to be the best approach? That communication doesn't just happen at design milestone. It doesn't just happen at task force meetings. It's this continuous over-the-shoulder review that happens by all parties that streamlines the design process and minimizes design issues or quality issues or confusion when it goes out to construction for the contractor team. So not only in design reviews, but even that informal portion of the review really is important in my mind.
Yeah, Matt, and I don't think we've talked a lot about, post-design, when you actually get out in the field and issues happen. But, when you've sat around the table and talked for a year about a project, you develop that respect and really understanding that, hey, if something happens, we're in it together. So, it's a quick call to the designer, the owner's there, the contractor's there. You can really dig into those unforeseen conditions and absolutely believe in each other that you're going to come up with the correct redesign and fix. And it just makes it so much easier for the owner to believe that everybody's on the same team.
It's funny you say that, Bob. We had an internal meeting to talk about Cmgc process as a company just a few weeks ago, and I was talking to a colleague in Minnesota. We were talking about how on our Cmgc projects, when there are issues, right, we just own those issues as contractors, right? We had an opportunity during design to identify those things. And when we recognize that we could have solved that problem 6 months ago, we own those problems. And that's the beauty of having partners in the Cmgc process, both the owner, the designer, and the contractor, who are willing to recognize when they own the risk and when they're responsible for doing the right thing by the project. And you're right, Bob, we were able to solve those things standing on grade, shake hands, and keep the project going, rather than turn them into letter writing campaigns or delays and distractions that really take us away from solving the real problems of providing a benefit to the end user of the infrastructure that we're building.
I know from a design standpoint, that relationship building with all of our construction counterparts was critical, not just through the development of the design, but post-design, responding to RFIs, requests for reviews. We work as a team together. That's huge.
Yeah, that consistency of the contractor team, the owner team, and the designer team transitioning from pre-construction to construction, not changing parties, right? The same manager for the contractor in pre-con that goes out to the field, the same project engineer for CDOT that then comes out and works in the field, and the designers stay keeping engagement on plan reviews is critical. Consistency will, really lead to the success of the project when all parties are involved.
I can't say enough how important it is, and it's just going to what Matt's saying, how important it is. If you can keep the same team together from the very beginning all the way to the end, you are in a huge advantage.
This panel has provided an incredible amount of context around Cmgc, its proficiencies, and really more so its results. I mean, when you're talking about planning your project effectively, identifying mitigating risks, optimizing construction schedule, opportunity to reduce your costs, the flexibility and the consistency of a team working together on an objective and a goal to meet the owner's needs. As I said earlier in the podcast, right, this is gaining popularity. It's not everywhere, but Federal Highway has adopted it. A lot of states then have also adopted it, and you're seeing the results. And the results are what are leading to this popularity. So I really just want to thank this panel. Matt, Bob, Michelle, appreciate your time. I know you guys are busy and currently working on CMGC projects right now, but keep it up and keep those proof points coming to ensure and enable this keeps moving forward.
Thanks a lot, Aaron.
Likewise. Thank you very much.
Yep. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank you for listening. Share our podcast and don't forget to subscribe to catch our next episode as our series continues to track the stimulus packages and we provide in-depth interviews with industry leaders and experts. Check us out at ulteig.com where we listen, we solve.